Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm Sandy, and this is the Ancestry Roads Webcast, where we talk about Appalachian stories. Today, I have a special guest. We're going to talk about Freemasonry and what it is and what it isn't. It's kind of important to the Appalachian area because a lot of the small towns have Masons. You probably have seen their buildings. They're been covered in mystery and secrecy. Well, we're going to kind of break loose with that and find out a little bit about what it is. Why did so many small towns have Mason halls, Freemasonry halls? And with my special guest today, who does happen to be a Freemason, is Eric Weddington. And he is a professional genealogist that specializes actually in genetic genealogy. And at the end of this, we'll tell you how to get in touch with him if you do have any genealogy exploration needs or more questions about Freemasonry. Meanwhile, if you have any questions about Freemasonry, feel free, drop them over in our chat. So let's go ahead and bring Eric up. Hi, Eric. Thanks for joining us today on the webcast for Freemasonry, what it is and what it isn't.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Now, how are you addressed? And before we get into it, how are you addressed? Are you addressed as brother?
Yeah, actually, that's what we call ourselves, brother so and so. I'm brother Eric, whatever. That's what the term that we use with each other.
Okay. And then right off the bat, what is Freemasonry?
Well, that's kind of the $64,000 question, right? Certainly, there's a lot of information online available. For example, there's very good Wikipedia articles out there. There's many good books. There's one book out there. I'm not the author. It's called Freemasonry for Dummies. Not that anybody here is a dummy or anything like that, but it's a good starting point for those who don't know anything about it, kind of organization and the history and so on. So what Freemasonry is, it is the world's oldest fraternity. So it's, as a fraternity, it's a group of men that have come together. Now it has a very, very long history, kind of to the point where, we aren't even sure exactly when it started. We have some ideas as to, rough time periods and where it started, but it's one of those, our history is kind of lost in the sands of time, if you will.
So when would you guess? What is the oldest that you know that it goes back?
Okay, so one of the dates that we always tell people is 1717. That was when the Grand Lodge of England was formed, and they basically announced that they exist. Now, let's talk a little bit about the organization of Freemasonry. Freemasonry has individual lodges. This is like the smallest organizational unit. You can think of it as kind of like a club, okay? When you bring several lodges together in a geographical area, they form a Grand Lodge. So the Grand Lodge of England was formed, if I recall correctly, from 4 lodges in the area at the time around London. And soon after, the Grand Lodge of Scotland was formed and the Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed. A little bit later, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts was the 4th Grand Lodge in the world.
Oh, so that would be the first one in the United
In the
States.
United States.
Was it the
Correct.
United States at that time?
No, it
No.
wasn't. It was in the early 1700s, though. Don't quote me. I want to say it's around 1740. Okay, so, but somewhere around in that area, that's the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts formed. Now, because of this, we say 1717 is kind of like the birth of Freemasonry. However, we know that Freemasonry existed many, many years before that. There are records that exist in the middle 1600s, both in Scotland and in England, basically diaries of a couple of men who wrote that they were made a Mason in a lodge. And some records even go back to the 1500s as well. Now we have hints that it could go back even further, but the problem is you start to hit this sort of documentation horizon, right, where it's really the documentation peters out, and so one doesn't know for sure exactly when it started. So that's a little bit of the problem of, how did this come about? But what we do know is that Freemasonry started out as the stone mason guilds in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And these stonemasons went around from country to country and they had some very specialized skills. They knew how to build things out of stone, and specifically cathedrals. And so they did this. So they were traveling workers with very specialized knowledge that, based on mathematics and how to build arches, how to build these amazing, beautiful, like I said, cathedrals. And so these guilds, they formed a way to help each other out and to help those who are traveling between countries.
Well, that's kind of fascinating because
Yeah.
the mason, the stone mason, you got the mason, they're traveling. They probably need some refuge at night when they're done and they get together. And it was really only men that had
Correct.
jobs and did this. So that's kind of fascinating. We don't think of that. We only
Well,
think of secrecy, you know?
Well, and with that, not only that, you kind of touched upon something. When they're traveling, you may not know the language very well. You're in a foreign land. How do you know who to trust? Okay, so these guilds get together and they help each other out and help those who are traveling. And it's basically, here's a group of men that that you know and trust based upon this guild system and these kind of little rituals that they formed around the knowledge that they kept about stonemasonry. Well, what happened is eventually there were other men, nobility and men of more financial means who were interested in this system, but they weren't stonemasons. So it gradually became something that was what we call operative masonry, basically something that was about stonemasons, and more about what we call speculative masonry. And by speculative, what we mean is it becomes more about a philosophical approach or a moralistic approach by using the symbology of these stonemason guilds that they had, worked out and collected and kept for hundreds of years.
Well, you know what I'm not hearing now? I'm not hearing religion.
No, Freemasonry is not a religion, never has been, never will be.
I think that's a common thing that people assume that this is not that there's a religion called Freemasonry, but the brotherhood
Right.
comes together collectively specifically because of a religion. But that's not true.
No, that's not true at all. And like I said, it never has been and it never will be. As a matter of fact, Freemasonry to this day, basically anybody from any religion can join it. There is one requirement that you have a belief in some higher power, but how you characterize that, how you view that, is completely up to you, and nobody tries to persuade you, to join any religion or anything like that.
That's
But
fascinating.
that's one of the requirements. Right?
Okay.
It's just some belief in higher power, however you term it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. So then they as they traveled, that's how it grew around the globe, I
Right.
presume, right? And then
Correct.
what it would be so different between let's just pick a random date. Let's say around 1776 and
Okay.
today. Are your tenets still basically the same? Your
Oh, yes.
beliefs and everything are
Yes.
still the same, so not much
Yes.
has changed.
Not much has changed. A little bit of the rituals from that time period have changed. Around the late 1700s is when they were kind of really gelled together to kind of what we use today. Interestingly, you picked the year 1776.
Yeah.
What most people don't realize is that George Washington was also a Freemason. And so we have that on our history. It's not talked about a whole lot, but there's actually a George Washington Masonic Memorial in Washington, D.C. That's part of Masonic groups there. And it's fascinating, this history, because many of Washington's, well, I don't want to say men underneath him, but some of the men underneath him became Freemasons. As I understand it, Lafayette was also a Freemason as well. And what this does is this creates this sort of network and web of trust. Okay, and that kind of network of trust has kind of been the sort of the underpinnings of Freemasonry, throughout history, throughout locations, and so on.
And this is why people think it's secretive, but it's really not. It's
No.
about keeping, well, if anything, if it's secretive, it's somebody's maybe personal secret. If another brother talks to a brother about something that's going on in their life, you probably feel, I can trust this person. They, I know,
That
but that's
that's
not the
exactly it.
goal of keeping Freemasonry a big secret. It's just that you keep everything within your group because it's a promise you made.
It is. And let's talk a little bit more about this whole idea of secrecy.
Yes,
And,
please.
Freemasonry is always talked about as, well, it's a secret society. All right, well, let's break this down. First off, it's not really a society, okay? It's a fraternity. Now, if it's secret, as in it's hidden, well, it does a really terrible job because a lot of people know about it. There's Freemasons all over the United States. It's probably in your town or city, okay? We are public. In other words, people can find us. Okay, you can find out information about, Freemasonry as an organization. So we're not really a secret society. Now, okay. Now let's go back in time. All right, let's go back to imagine going back to the 1700s. Imagine going back even further into the 1600s. You have to go back to world history at the time, and especially the history in England and Scotland and Ireland, and what was going on there. Freemasonry is basically men from different walks of life, different classes coming together, okay, and sharing a fraternal bond with each other, which, by the way, back then was unheard of.
I was going to say
Okay,
that's a very important point. I hope everybody
it is.
heard what Eric said. Different classes. You don't see that in back in that time in any facet. You don't see it
Right.
in your religion. You don't see it
Correct.
in your your neighborhood castle life. The feudum. So
Right.
you don't see that anywhere. So you're saying that Freemasonry
Mm-hmm.
took in, anyone and did not like a peerage would not look down at a serf.
Well, yeah, but let's you hit on another point we'll have to circle back
Okay.
around to. Okay, so but imagine different class system. Well, especially like a nobility versus somebody who's maybe a merchant. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
versus somebody who may be a laborer. Okay, normally these class strata, if you belong to a class, you really don't mix with others. Okay, except in Freemasonry, you can. Okay, now it was held kind of private so that way they could mix together, but in doing so, they also shared different ideas, and it also allowed for free inquiry. Now, free inquiry, what does that mean? Well, it means we could talk about different kinds of subjects freely without being overseen by those who are in power. All right, let's take a look at the power structures in the 1600s and the 1700s. The power structures of the time were basically your monarch, the
Yeah.
king, and the nobility, and the church. So if you belong to an organization that's kind of underground, right, that allows this free inquiry among different classes of men, if you're in power, this could be very threatening.
Yeah, in
So if you're the
1600,
king
yes.
or the nobility or part of the church and you're not a part of it, like I said, it could be very threatening to your power base. And so that is why they stayed underground, because it was self-preservation.
And that's
Okay,
where the secrecy,
and
with
that's where the
another
secrecy comes
part
from.
of Freemasonry's bits of secrecy that we would get.
Correct. That's what's associated with. Oh, it's a secret society. No, Freemasonry has been out as an organization since 1717. Okay. Now, the other thing is, let's go back to another thing about why this secrecy around it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that just like a fraternity in, let's say, a university, right? You join a university, everybody hears about, they have like these initiation rituals, okay? Now, everybody knows about, potential hazing that's going on and so on. Well, Freemasonry also has initiation rituals as well.
Can
Okay,
you
now,
tell us about those?
well, hold on. Now, they don't have hazing or anything like that because
Okay,
we don't do anything bad or negative
that's
or
good.
anything like that. Okay, but what we have done is that we've say, hey, you know what? These are private to us. Okay. For instance, I basically made a promise not to share what they are. And there's a reason for that. Now, I can tell you the reason, but I won't share, what goes on or the rituals or all this kind of stuff. But there's a reason why that privacy is so needed, okay? Now, these are stereotypes, but they still apply. And you and I talked about this briefly offline, is that as a stereotype, women have a tendency to bond with each other through talk, through stories, and sharing, things that are very verbal. Men, on the other hand, bond together over shared experiences. Okay, so we're not as verbal as women, but hey, if you've gone through some experience and I've gone through something same or similar, and we talk about it, it's like, wow, did you experience? Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Okay, and so that creates that bond. Okay, that is needed. For example, men in the military, right? I've heard this said over and over about how men who are in the military or in a war or whatever, they have very similar experiences. They share that with each other. They share this kind of, brotherhood, okay, amongst themselves.
So we wouldn't understand unless you were there, especially if you're at war. Right. No way anybody, a man, woman, child, dog, cat would never understand any of things that they went on. So I can see where Freemasonry they feel protected and safe.
Exactly. So it is a shared experience that we go through, and it makes us closer. It develops that brotherhood that is necessary to have this type of, fraternity. I know that I can trust my brother. Now, there's also, with this is kind of a little bit of a segue, but related. Part of Freemasonry, there's a saying that we have in Freemasonry. What is Freemasonry? Well, Freemasonry is a system of morality that is, now of course I'm going to forget now that I'm on the spot. System of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated with symbols. So we have that kind of phrase that kind of goes around.
Well, break that down for us.
Well, right. So a system of morality. Now, what does this mean? Now, okay, again, we talk about this network of trust, right? This whole idea that within Freemasonry, we also say that we make good men better, right? Now, what does that mean, too? Well, we don't just accept anybody within Freemasonry, even just any man who just comes along. Because we say we're not a reform group. We want men who are already good, let's say at a certain level, so that way we come in and we make them better. Okay, now what does it mean? Hey, if you're an alcoholic, I know it's tough. That's a thing that you're going to have to fix, but you're going to have to fix it on your own, right? We're not here as a reform group to help you with that. There's plenty of other organizations that are out there, and many of them are excellent, to help you to improve yourself.
I was going to say, is that because there are other places that do that better?
Well, and it's also because it would be a drain on us, right? We kind of target, hey, those who are basically, if you have your act together, then you might be interested in us. If you don't have your act together, if you're an alcoholic, if you got addictions, if you're gambling addiction, whatever, you have issues at home, it's like clean your house first before coming to Freemasonry, because we want to take good men and make them even better, because we're all about trying to build things up, okay? Not reform, not to bring people up to some, minimum standard, right? But take them even further, okay? So we make good men better. So this is why it's a system of morality. Now, a system of morality, let's go back to that. So what does this mean? Well, it means, and this has entered our language, in the English language, okay? In the English language about, hey, are we square? We've done something. Are we square?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got something squared away, with this person. What does that mean? Well, if you're squared with someone, that means you've had honest, direct communications and relationship with that person, and they have had that with you. In other words, it's an honest relationship. There's nothing shady going on. Nothing is at an angle. Nobody has a particular spin trying to get something out of you.
No hidden agenda between two
No
people.
hidden agenda.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that idea of the square comes from the symbolism we find within Freemasonry. The Carpenter Square, okay, where we talk about, right angles and, also the compasses and so on. So, the symbolism has entered into the language in that kind of sense. So I know that when I'm dealing with my brother in Freemasonry, we have a shared experience. I can trust them. I can be square with them. They can be square with me. And I can do that if I'm traveling to some other lodge in some other area. Okay, so now you can see that it develops this network of people you can trust.
It's important in this day and age. I know it was important back, when we didn't have the cars, the TV, where the
Absolutely.
horse and buggy still.
Very much so. Yes.
But the trust is still needed, no matter what
Absolutely
year we're
it is.
talking about. So that's an interesting point you make.
That is correct. Now, how this is relevant is let's talk about Freemasons in rural areas, right? A lot of times in rural areas, the law or somebody to enforce the law is remote. Maybe they're not there. Maybe they're, one county over or something. Or, let's say you're traveling in a rural area. You don't know the people there, but if you're a Freemason and there's other Masons in the area, okay, here are some people that who will work with you directly, and honestly, and that you can trust them. This was very important with the westward expansion of people in the United States. So, for instance, there's people who's written history of Freemasonry in Montana or Colorado, for example, where it was very important when those people came out there because, again, the law, they had to catch up. People were moving out there because of, the gold rush and so on. Towns, grew up overnight. So who are the people that, you're out there in this remote wilderness, basically? Who are the people you can trust? Well, the Freemasons.
Freemason.
Exactly. These were the ones who were looking to basically, trust each other, do things lawfully.
Safe refuge. And I want to point out real quick, because we do talk about Appalachian stories here, and Freemasonry is a global, it's out there globally. I don't want to say global idea. It's a global fraternity, I should say. And the reason why I wanted Eric to come on for this specific, because we are Appalachian. Eric has the Appalachian Kentucky, and as everybody knows, I have the Appalachian West Virginia. As you touched on briefly at the beginning of this particular segment, in small towns, and even before they went west, a lot of our Appalachians went west, and a lot of them started with the Freemasonry in their own small little mountain towns and hollers. And then that's where they knew who they could trust and had, which the courage to go west, which I think is amazing that our ancestors had this courage to go west. And I don't want to say they had the funds, but they knew if something happened, they probably had Freemasonry, or they knew they had a roof over their head at least if something happened.
Correct. And not only that, within Freemasonry, there's kind of a special emphasis placed on widows and orphans. Okay, So 1800s, there's no such thing as insurance, right? If something happened to you, who's going to take care of your widow? Who's going to take care of your children? If you died or got sick or got hurt. Well, a lot of times, if you were a Freemason, the lodge came in and helped you out.
Interesting.
They helped each other out, right? So again, it's people that you know and could trust, and because it's a fraternity, you contributed to it, they contribute back, and good works and helping each other out. And as a matter of fact, this is kind of where the start of the insurance industry came from. Was in many places these type of fraternal organizations, not only Freemasonry, but other fraternal organizations that were started in the 1800s that modeled themselves after the Freemasonry. A lot of people know about the elks and the moose, the lions, and
the
so
woodmen
on and so
of
forth.
the world.
Woodmen of the world, right? Yeah, exactly. because in some ways these organizations, they did help each other out.
And then we do want to point out, because I know that this is a common question. I know when I first met Eric, this was absolutely probably the first question I asked after I said, "Why are you so secretive? Are you a moose? Are you an elk? Are you with me?" No,
the moose.
you're not at
No.
all. But I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I do believe if you're a Shiner, you are a Mason. You're a Freemason.
Shriner. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Now, it was kind of funny. The shrine, as it's called, right? If you're a member, you're a Shriner. Was actually started by Freemasons, and they started in the late 1800s by Masons as a way of just having another kind of like fun organization. Now, this is the downside of Freemasonry is, man, these guys, they like to get together and create organizations and degrees and all sorts of things for all sorts of purposes. Now, I'm not denigrating the shrine. The shrine in and of itself have done amazing work because they focus so much on charity, okay?
Yeah.
I'm sure if you've gone, to some small town parade, you've seen the clown cars, right? The Shriners wearing the fez hats, driving around. I saw it when I was growing up.
Heck, I don't even need to do that. At the major intersection around the corner from me up in Cumming, Georgia, there's a guy there every weekend, a very old gentleman with his bucket, with his hat, in the heat,
collecting
in the
money.
rain, whatever.
Yes.
So you're right. They do.
Yeah, they collect money. They have their own hospitals, and specifically where they help children. They help a lot of burn victims. They also help children who have hearing disabilities and so on. They do amazing works. Okay, I am not a member of Shrine. Okay, so this is what I know from talking to my brothers who are Shriners. There was a requirement that you had to be a master Mason. That's we'll get into that. In order to join the Shrine. I don't know what the requirements are now, but that was definitely one of the sort of affiliate organizations, if you will.
Let me ask you. Somebody asked.
Odd fellows.
Are
Yes.
not an odd fellow, right?
No,
you might be odd, you might be a fellow, but you're not an odd fellow, right?
No, and it's called the International Order of Odd Fellows, or IOOF, and they are a completely separate organization.
And I might add, Eric just pointed out something very important. If you're ever research Appalachian, well, probably everywhere, but specifically Appalachian cemeteries, you see the IOOF cemeteries everywhere. Let me get two other quick questions that came up that are really good. Nick, is there a minimum age someone would have to be?
Yes, you have to be 18 years old.
Okay, and again, we're talking fraternity, so male only. And
male
Patty
only,
has a really good question, kind of follow up as we move along. So if one of your brothers breaks the trust, is he thrown out? What happens?
Well,
and I guess there are degrees of breaking trust.
Well, right, and let's say it all depends on the situation.
Okay, well, let's say it's really bad.
Well, let's say it's really bad. Again, I can't go there because, again, it depends on the situation, depends on the lodge, depends on the Grand Lodge, the region. This is one of those where, I'm not going to get into kind of what-if situations, right? Mainly because, just like our own justice system, okay, in America, somebody's innocent until they're proven guilty, right? So I can't really get into hypotheticals.
It makes sense. Okay.
Right. Now, I will say, have men been thrown out of the fraternity before? Yes. For various things where, yes, certain kinds of trust has been broken. But again, it depends on the very specific nature of the issue, okay? That's all I can say, really.
Okay. We've got another question. This kind of leads into a different section, but it's an interesting section. Billy would like to have some memorabilia. Is there memorabilia?
Oh my gosh, is there memorabilia? Boy, that's the one thing we love. It's memorabilia. We love to have all sorts of stuff. Rings, okay? So, jewelry. I don't have mine on. But Masonic rings is very common. Sometimes watches. Modern days, well, we love lapel pins, right? We wear suits a lot. You gotta represent, have something on your lapel, right? A little Masonic symbol on there. Or sometimes, as the joke says, the full metal jacket where you have lapel pins on one side and the other side, such that it's, it's a full metal jacket. So we love our bling. Oh, ties. I mean, ties with the Masonic symbol, hats. We love hats. We like dressing up. We like, looking good. We love our symbology that goes with it. We're proud to be Masons.
You typically, when you go to a meeting, wasn't it back in the day, you were in tux?
Well, interesting you should say that. Okay, so my lodge is a little bit different. I belong to Enlightenment Lodge number 198 out in Colorado. And what they do is something very different from most other lodges, and that is lodge members, when we go to our meetings, we are in full white tie and tails.
White tie and tails, okay.
Yes, because that is the highest level of dress code for men. You think a suit might be the highest level of dress code. No.
Especially these days.
These days, most people treat a suit as like, oh gosh, I don't want to wear the monkey suit, right? Okay, but business suit, we treat that as, that's like should be every day, kind of thing. If we want to dress up, you do black tie, which is a tuxedo, okay, evening dress, and there's white tie, where it's very specific materials, very specific cuts, very, you can look online. But we do that. Now, why do we do that? All right.
Yeah, is this once a month?
Yeah, it's once a month for us.
Okay,
And we do this mostly because most people think, oh, well, you're just being arrogant and, all this. No, it has nothing to do with it. It's interesting because I didn't know this when I joined. It was like, wow, this seems kind of weird. I didn't know anything about white tie and tails. I had to go look everything up, get everything, and learn how to tie a bow tie and all sorts of stuff. But when I did, it was interesting. All of a sudden, I stood up straighter. I walked a little taller.
Oh.
Okay? It was like I was proud to be, wow, I'm looking pretty good. My wife, she looks, wow, you look hot. It's like, all right,
You're wearing that tux
so,
more often.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, maybe we should go out on a date in this. So, it was really neat to have that kind of feeling and to see other men dressed up the same way you are, right? It's like a uniform, right? Where it's like,
it is, yeah.
But it's not about projecting, it's not about looking down on somebody else. It's about how you feel in it and what it does to you.
Making good men better.
Making good men better. And once you get used to wearing white tie on a regular basis, and then we also have business meetings that are in business suits. Once you get used to business suits and going to white tie or tuxedo and all this kind of stuff, all of a sudden, getting dressed up is not a big thing at all. And actually, you start collecting, a number of good outfits. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, there's a wedding. I've got a outfit for that. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, if somebody has a funeral, you also have an outfit for that too. Yes, but it's about looking good and like I said, what it does to your own self-image and your own self-confidence.
So then you walk into the meeting. It's once a month, and in your particular lodge, and every lodge is different.
Every lodge is different. Every lodge is different culture, different backgrounds, different focuses on what they do. There is always an underlying sameness to it. There is let's say a ritual about it, and that's where I draw the line and say I can't get into that. Again, because that goes back to the nature of, look, I took a promise not to, give away what we do there and so on. But, like any kind of meeting of any kind of club, there's always going to be some level of business that is honestly going to be boring, right?
Okay. And then is the second...
You have to pay the bills, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? You have, people who correspond with you. You have to, do that kind of stuff. None of that is private, in the sense of none of that is secret, right? Okay.
Once you're inside your meeting.
Yeah, once you're inside the meeting.
Once the meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Well, and then you have, do you have meal? Do you sit down as a meal? Can you talk about this?
Yeah, well, certainly can talk about that because the meal is not part of the meeting per se. So a lot of times we have a meal. Now, Masonic lodges meet anywhere between Monday and Saturday. Different lodges have different days that they meet. Some meet, they have their own schedule. Some meet twice a month. Some meet in the evening. Some of them meet during the day. Okay. Some meet during the week. evenings, some meet on the weekends, right? So when there's a meal, who knows? It depends on your local lodge. Is it before the meeting? Is it after the meeting? It really all depends. But a lot of times that idea of sharing a meal together, right? Just like anywhere, it increases that fraternal bond, right, with each other. You're breaking bread together. And many times the meal is completely open. So we may have certain meals where we invite outside people who are interested in Freemasonry. Hey, come get to know us. Come share a meal with us, and we'll talk about it and get to know you. You get to know us. We get to know you. That sort of thing. But
So
again, every lodge is different.
Part?
Well,
Where's the
that's in the
secret
meat.
part of your whole meeting?
Well, there are parts. I mean, in the sense that there are ceremonies and rituals that I will not go into.
Okay.
So, there's that. And part of it is because, let's go back to that phrase again, right? It's a system of morality, all right, that is veiled in allegory and illustrated with symbols. There's a lot of symbolry and symbolism within Freemasonry that is very old, that goes back, 1700s, 1600s, 1500s. Okay, it goes back to the Renaissance or even the Middle Ages, to the point where some of the symbolry is part of what we call the overall Western mystery tradition. Okay, so again, there's books that kind of go into this that you can get out there, and those are important to us, and we don't want to just talk about that with anybody, right? And so that's why it's like, no, we're private about that. Not because there's some big secrets or anything, but because we want to foster that open discourse, that open communication, right, amongst ourselves.
So I always have thought of it as a secret society. I'll say fraternity now, and I've always thought that was based in religion. So you're debunking a lot of these myths that I had, but I also thought that as a collective group, you're very big into service projects outside of your hall. And in particular, like my father is buried in West Virginia in a Masonic cemetery. I'm assuming the Masons are paying for that.
I would assume so, but again, it depends on the local area.
But is that the type of service that you...
Not necessarily. I mean, this is where it really depends on the lodge involved.
Okay.
The lodge, Grand Lodge, every lodge has, a little bit of its own culture, right? There are many lodges that are out there that focus on charity works.
Yeah.
Okay. When I say charity works, raising money, giving money to organizations, so on. Maybe sponsoring the local, teacher of the month kind of thing. Maybe getting bicycles for, kids, whose family they don't have money for. There's all different kinds of way to do charitable works. My lodge in particular doesn't necessarily focus on charitable works, okay? They have more of a philosophical or esoteric kind of focus, where they focus on, the underlying symbolism and the meaning of that, and kind of delving deep into that kind of stuff. My lodge is sort of unique in that area. Many other lodges, like I said, they do different things, but the underlying concept is charity. We talk about that even within lodge. We talk about, faith, hope, and charity, and charity being kind of the greatest of them all. Now, charity can come in all different kinds of forms. Charity can be, let's raise money and give out money. Okay, that's the very basic physical form. Charity could be, hey, within our lodge, we're going to look out for everybody. Hey, Joe over here, he's in his 80s. He has a hard time making a lodge. I want to make sure to help him out. Because you need help around, the house, the yard works, and so on. Hey, John passed away. How's his widow doing?
That's a good point, because you do take care of the widows and orphans.
Right.
Well,
So
here's
charity can be that.
another question.
Go
ahead.
Hold on, I'm going to finish this. Charity can also be in the form of being there for somebody.
Yeah, it really can.
Sometimes just being an ear. Hey, somebody's going through a rough period in their life. Be a friend.
Yeah.
And be an ear, so that way they can talk to you, knowing that they can trust you to hold
I was going to say, there comes that trust again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got an issue with my relationship or something like that. I don't want it to get out. I'm working on it, but I need somebody to just talk to. hey, great, let's go have a beer, smoke a cigar, or whatever, whatever floats their boat. But,
Yeah.
having somebody that to trust, that's not going to go, around and go blab it to everybody.
And say, hey, did you hear about Joe? Joe's having problems with his wife. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that makes
exactly.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Shelley has a
Yes.
question. Can you talk about the Associated Women's Organizations? I saw in an obituary that a relation was a Rebecca, and I'm not familiar with that.
Right. Now, I can talk a little bit about it, but I'm also going to refer people back to kind of Wikipedia about that. Freemasonry has all sorts of associated organizations, and some of those are youth organizations, and some of them are also women's organizations. So let's talk about the biggest one, and that is the Order of the Eastern Star. Order of the Eastern Star is both for Freemasons and women who are related to Freemasons. So that could be their daughters, their wives, sisters. Basically, if you have a relationship of some level to a Freemason, then you can join the Order of the Eastern Star as a woman.
But that's
Now, they
not
have
a
their
Rebecca?
That's not a Rebecca. Okay,
Okay.
so we're going to get there. Now, there are other youth organizations that are out there, and there's Rainbow Girls, there's Rebeccas, there's, gosh, I'm going to forget.
Well, that's fine,
I
but
didn't quite plan
you're
on
giving
that,
us a
but
good idea.
yeah, well, there's one for boys specifically, and
Okay.
I'm going to hate to say it, I forgot I'd have to go, look up here in Wikipedia really fast, but
Well,
yeah,
now we have another question that kind of
Yeah.
ties into this too. How do you
Yeah.
find out if a wife was in the woman's lodge?
Okay, so let's talk about identifying family members. Now that we can kind of get into the genealogy aspect of it, how do you know if your family member was a Freemason? Well, a lot of times, I hate to say it, you're going to find out either through an obituary or on the gravestone. So Freemasons were, we love our symbols, symbols and symbolism and so on. So we put them on our gravestones or our grave markers. And yeah, so that is certainly one of them right there. That specific symbol right there is called the square and compass and the letter G. Yeah, let's go back
There we
to
go.
that. Yeah, so you can see it a little bit. Actually, if you could scroll back up, I'm sorry. We're not looking at the main symbol. There we go, right there. Okay, so the square encompasses and the letter G. Now, the square is at the bottom. It looks like a carpenter's square. Up at the top, kind of looks like part of a triangle, is what we call a pair of compasses. Like you used in math class to draw a circle. That's what it is. And by the way, it's called a pair of compasses, like a pair of pants. So it's not a compass, it's a pair of compasses. Okay. Then we have the letter G. Now, the letter G, we say, stands for geometry or God, either one. And it's typically used in America. So for those who are interested in European Masonry, typically you won't see the G there. But in American Masonry, it'll typically be a G there. And we take that symbol and we put it on all sorts of things. Remember how I said about artifacts, hey, maybe it's on a tie, maybe it's on a lapel pin. Yeah, and actually, if you kind of scroll down some more, we'll kind of get to that. There you go. There's one. So this is a monument actually in a cemetery in the Denver metro area, where it's a region of this very big cemetery that has Masons in it. And there you go. So we have it on.
More.
Yeah, actually we do, right there. Yeah, so here's the beginning of it. And by the way, I could share my screen and we could do some larger pictures of it if you want to do that.
Okay, let's do that.
So let
And
me.
I want to just remind everybody as well that we have about 10-15 minutes left. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them and we'll try and get to them. We're going to finish this part of the talk and we'll try and get to them at the end. So
Okay.
if you have any questions, please post them now so we can collect them.
All
Okay,
right.
go ahead, Eric.
Sandy, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, very good. Okay, so here's some gravestone or grave marker examples. So here in the circle, kind of blown up, you can see the pair of compasses, the square and the G.
I can
and
only
that
see
means-
your first slide. It doesn't show the tombstone.
Oh, it doesn't show the tombstone. Okay.
Let's see.
Well, I tell you what.
Let's see if I can.
Yeah, there you go. If you can control it, then you have to kind of keep going.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go. How about here?
Well, that's okay. Yep,
Okay.
that'll work too. All right, so there's another one there on the left. Again, square compasses in the G, another one on the right. So this is a way that you can tell if your male relative was a Freemason. And a lot of times they'll have it on the tombstone. Here's one on the right that's a little bit different because it's actually part of the top of it is the pair of compasses. You see the last name of Fru. Well, why does it have a letter G? Well, that's because right below that you have the square, and then the top edge of the gravestone, excuse me, not tombstone, the gravestone, top edge is the pair of compasses. So if you keep going down, we have some more examples. Now we talked about women. If you could go just a few more slides down, we will, I do a set of slides that for the Order Eastern Star. Keep going if you could. Then we talk about Scottish rites, symbols in here. Keep on going. Hopefully one more. There we go. Okay, so here we have on the right, we have a star, and you have OES, Order of the Eastern Star. So a lot of times you will be in your cemetery, and you will see the picture on the left. Here's the husband who has the square and compasses, and the wife who has the Order of the Eastern Star. You will see that a lot of times
That's interesting.
together. Yes.
Because I was going to ask you earlier that if they shared a tombstone and they just had the one symbol up at the middle, that was going to be directly related to the male, and assume that the female was
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Well, yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, many times it's just the man who was a Freemason. The woman wasn't involved in the organization because it's a personal choice. Maybe she wasn't interested. Who knows?
And Billy, I will also say that when I first met Eric, one of the questions I had was I knew that my husband's great uncle was a Mason, and at one point his lodge's website had a list of all the roles, and then they took it down for some reason. And Eric said, just call him and ask.
Absolutely.
And I was like, no, you're so secretive, I can't do that. And he goes, no, why? Just call him, ask. And I did. And it worked.
Every lodge has a secretary. It is an officer position, and the secretary, just like a secretary of any kind of club or anything, they keep the records. Okay, a Grand Lodge, which is over the entire state, they have a Grand Secretary. Again, they keep the records. So just reach out to the Grand Lodge, reach out to the local lodge, talk to the secretary, and just ask. They'll be more than happy to typically look stuff up for you and things like that, especially something historical or genealogical.
And I gotta say, I am completely blown away and shocked that advice worked. I was so shocked. And as genealogists, you know that we're always looking for source documents or some type of source.
Right.
And I'm going to show you in a minute what Eric does on WikiTree, but just call them up. And they gave me all the details that this gentleman was a member of the lodge. And then they even said, here's a cemetery. I already had that part, but they even offered information I didn't even ask for. So it's kind of hard to rationalize how secret you guys are when they're freely giving me information.
Right. We are not a secret society. Some people say we're a society with secrets. It's a little bit of a different way of looking at it, and that's just because that shared experience of the rituals that we have, our initiation rituals. I've made a promise not to reveal them, for good reason. So
makes sense.
That's the part that's secret, but we have men joining all the time, so it's I just can't divulge that part of it. But beyond that, it's a great organization. Men join it for various different reasons. Some have. It's like it runs in the family. Oh, well, my father was it, my grandfather was, my great-grandfather was, so I'm interested. Why? Because it's a family tradition. Some are very much interested in the history of it. Wow, I found out George Washington was a Mason, and I'm interested in, wow, this has been around for hundreds of years. I want to know more. And, I like the causes, the things that they do. Some are interested in the kind of the sort of the symbology aspect of it, the fact that it is part of a Western mystery tradition.
So it's many different ways that a man will walk up to a Freemason lodge and want to know more, become a Freemason. And I think the most powerful example that you gave me, and I'm glad you shared it again, was the military. And
Hmm.
I see that, but I see it as well because we got to admit, as a woman, we when my kid was younger, we used to do mom's night out. There is no way we're inviting males to that. We're
Right.
talking about stuff. So in a way, it's kind
Well,
of the same thing,
right.
except this is more structured.
Men have no idea what it's like, to go through birth. They never will. I'm very thankful for it. I totally respect women in that regard. Women are amazing. I can't do it. Don't want to do it. So it's, men and women are different for reasons, right?
And we
So
both have
yeah,
our needs to be around, I guess, our kind, just to
yeah,
share, to talk, to laugh, maybe commiserate, maybe
right.
complain about something. Who knows? There's a wealth of things that I know we used to talk about during mom's night out that I
Yes,
never could have imagined we would have talked about. And I imagine it's the same for the
exactly.
Freemasons. It's just that
Exactly.
trust flow.
Exactly. You got it. You got it.
Well, let me bring up the one thing that is how to find Eric after this particular broadcast ends. And both Eric and I are members of WikiTree, wikitree.com. Love WikiTree. It is free. I always remind people free, free, and free. Eric has created a page for Freemasonry. And if you notice, here's his name. You can send him a private message if you want to reach out to him. And by clicking on that, a little page will come up where you can fill out any questions you might have, and it will email him directly, and then he can get back to you. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is if you didn't take notes or can't remember or didn't get a question answered during this broadcast, this page has tons of information. For example, as genealogists, if we want to know how to source, how to find sources, he gives that information and also tells you how to provide the wording for that information, as well as the cemeteries. We saw some examples of the cemeteries and obituaries. I think some of you mentioned that you saw in the obituaries for ancestors that they were a Mason, and a little bit more information about the membership, the family Bibles, and so on. The other really great thing is if you join wikitree.com as well, you can leave a comment at the bottom of this page. Excuse me for scrolling too fast. I don't want
It's
anybody to
okay.
get
It's a long
vertigo.
page.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to get vertigo, but you can see that if you leave a message, Eric does reply too.
Yes.
You do have to be a member of wikitree.com to leave a message, but it's really great because sometimes people have specific one question, sometimes they have a lot of questions, and that's just a way for him to get back in touch with you. And it's a great resource to just find out more about Freemasonry, as well as he mentioned wikipedia.com. But the reason why I love WikiTree, again, free, you can add all your ancestors tree. It's one tree, it's not 15 million like the other ancestry type genealogy websites. It's collaborative. You do have to work for it. You do have to put in proper sources and proper biographies, but you also have resources like Eric. There's no way I would have ever known how to find this great uncle if I hadn't stumbled on Eric on WikiTree. We became friends and I was able to ask him questions. So I want to point out again, wikitree.com, and then just do a search for Freemasonry and you'll see this page come up, and it's easy peasy. And Eric's really good. He's really quick about answering questions as well. Let me see. I think Shelley, perhaps it would be more accurate to say they are private and not
Right.
secretive.
Right. And that you hit the nail on the head there, Shelley. I mean, right. We're private. It's a private fraternity. Um, there's some things that, we'll talk about and some things we won't, just because we're private. We're not some sort of secret organization. The joke is that we're people just like anything else. The joke is, we're not running the world. Heck, sometimes it's hard enough just to plan a picnic Okay, it's and I've literally seen that happen. I mean, yeah. Hey, do we want to have a summer picnic together? Oh, where are we going to have it? When is it going to be? Do we invite everybody?
Who's bringing potato salad?
Yeah,
Who's cooking the hot
exactly.
dogs? Who's doing this? Yeah.
You're right. So it's not something nefarious or anything like that. It does have a long history. It has a history that kind of obscure, and obscured even to us, right? Because it evolved so long ago, but it's still around. So, but that's part of the uniqueness about it,
Hmm.
and the part of the interest of it is, there's many men in there who love doing this kind of research, a lot like genealogy, right? Learning about the history, finding out all sorts of unique things, writing papers about it. We have, there's academic journals, within Freemasonry, just about the history of it and so on. So, it's something that's very unique. To the world, and especially to the English-speaking world. Now, Freemasonry is in other countries as well. It's in, France, Spain, Germany, Norway, Sweden, all sorts of things. And you can find it even in India and Japan. But, it had its heart kind of in the English-speaking world. So it's just something, like, again, that it's just very unique. And can be important when you're looking at history and when you're looking at genealogy. I mean, we talk about how amazing General George Washington is and what he did. But, part of what he did was that he had a network of men that he could trust. And that's because he was a Freemason.
And I know if you think about that and you think of where America is today, who knows? How important was
Exactly.
that trust? It just gives you another piece to a puzzle of a person, of your
Right.
ancestor, let's say, just another piece that you maybe know or didn't know about them. But
Right.
and I want to thank Eric for kind of debunking the myths. I know that he's debunked a lot of my myths back and forth for the past couple of months, so I appreciate that. And I also want to point out that Eric will be back in a future webcast on a completely different subject. We're going to be talking about NPEs, non-parent parental expected. I like to just call it as whoa, the DNA came back and who's your daddy? But we're going to be talking about that because that's something that Eric specializes in. He specializes in the genetic DNA. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to us on our website at ancestryroads.com. Other than that, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Thank
I've
you.
learned a lot. I hope everybody else has. And remember, if you have any questions, reach out to Eric on the Freemasonry website on wikitree.com. Otherwise, we will see you again on Ancestry Roads Webcast.